Hi, everyone. Welcome back from lunch. So I might be the first person to not make fun of Abhi today. I love Abhi, and I'm his biggest fan, so no more making fun of him. All right. So I am here to talk to you about civic innovation and procurement reform, or as I now know to call it, the bottom of the stack, thanks to David. Click. There we go. Okay. So, as we all know, and as many of you live on a daily basis, revenue to government continues to decline, even as demand from citizens for services is ever increasing. Okay, so this theoretically is exactly the type of problem that private sector innovation in the form of for-profit civic startups could address to bring technology innovation to the public sector and try to help resolve that tension. But it's not as simple as it sounds. So there are three problems here. The first of which, for any of you who are civic entrepreneurs in this space will have experienced, is an access problem, right? Having relationships within government to even know who to talk to sell your service, not to mention trying to navigate the procurement process, is really difficult. Then you've got another problem, which I call the investor problem, and that's one that I've lived, which is that investors historically have shied away from investing in companies whose primary customer is government, because government sales cycles are so long. So you've got civic startups who are starved for cash as they're trying to make their way through this long sales cycle. And that leads to the entrepreneur problem, which is if you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to decide, where should I start a company? Do you want to start it in a space where the customers are hard to penetrate, the sales cycles are really long, oh, and by the way, it's going to be really hard to raise capital while you're doing it. There are probably easier ways to make a living than doing it in a for-profit civic startup. So these are all challenges. So Omidyar Network is a philanthropic investment firm, which means that we do both for-profit investing and nonprofit grant making in a number of areas. One of them is government transparency/public innovation. And there, our mission is to enhance the relationship between citizens and government, to empower citizens, and to help facilitate more fair, effective, and efficient government. And we think that bringing technology solutions to bear can really help enhance that relationship and solve that problem by bringing technology, reducing costs to the public sector, and also creating sustainable revenue streams for entrepreneurs. So to date, we have contributed over $70 million to nonprofit organizations who have been building this sector, some of which you know incredibly well, like Code for America, our host today, and biggest fan of the way in which Code for America has really built this ecosystem and shown what's possible here. And there are other great organizations who are nonprofits who are working in this field as well. The Sunlight Foundation, who all of you know, and who actually was also one of the very early funders of Code for America, and the Open Knowledge Foundation. That's just to name a few. There are a number of fantastic organizations who are all organized as nonprofits who've really built the foundation for the ecosystem. But what I'd like to suggest to you is that in addition to having this nonprofit set of actors who are really showing what's possible and building a movement, we also need a strong for-profit civic innovation sector. So why is that? Three reasons, because there are always three things. The first is sustainability. So to put this really bluntly, there's just not enough philanthropic capital to solve the problem that we're trying to solve here and to fund all the change that needs to be made. So for-profit civic startups, if they can bring a business model to the table here, can actually be sustainable and bring long-lasting change to the sector in a way that nonprofits may not be able to have. This relates to the second reason, which is scalability. So we've seen some incredible demonstration points in the last day and a half about what's possible and what can be done with technology to solve that problem of declining revenue and increasing citizen expectations. The problem or the challenge now is to take those experiments and those solutions and actually scale them to make change across the sector. And again, for-profits, in my view, are best positioned to actually have that scalability. Click. And those two things, sustainability and the scalability, can really lead to innovation and disruption in a big way. And this is a huge market, by the way. This is not just a philanthropic endeavor. So the global government IT spend market will surpass $450 billion this year. And the US federal IT spend is over $75 billion, of which, by the way, OMB estimates that about 25% is mismanaged today. So this is a real market opportunity for-profit civic startups. And, surprise, we've seen several of them in the last day and a half talking about the types of innovations they're trying to create and the markets they're trying to penetrate. You've heard from MindMixer, Civic Insight, and others, and you'll be hearing from Smart Procure, Screen Door, and others this afternoon. So the question is, okay, great, we've got civic startups. Everything's fine, right? Well, it's not exactly fine. There is one major barrier that's standing in the way, in my view, and I think in many others' view, to really growing for-profit innovation in this space. And what is it? It's procurement. Right, so procurement, the fodder for many jokes. Did you know that there's a whole website dedicated to jokes about procurement and supply chain issues? I Googled that and found it out. But if there's anything that the rollout of healthcare.gov has shown us over the last couple weeks, it's that it's not a joke, it's a serious problem, and there are great people working within a very broken system. And what used to be just the domain of the tech geeks of us in the room worrying about it is actually now playing out on a national stage. So this is an opportunity and a moment to really kind of try to foster that enthusiasm and recognition of the problem and do something about it. Okay, so what can procurement change or procurement reform do? In my view, there are three things. First of all is certainly increased competition. If we want to have radically better products and services at a radically lower cost, we've got to open up the playing field for innovative small companies to participate in the process. The second thing it does is actually create economic development. And we've heard from cities, from all of you here today, about the importance of economic development in your communities. And so giving access to small business to IT projects in government can actually spur that development. And finally, greater transparency. Understanding how taxpayer dollars are spent is really important to good governance. And so changing the way procurement works can have a very big impact on that. Okay, so the good news is that there are lots of people who are excited about the idea of procurement reform. Who knew? So Code for America and Sunlight did a survey recently of city IT purchasers, and 75% of respondents said that they are currently prioritizing procurement reform, and 32% said they've already identified workarounds to the current process. And this afternoon, you'll be hearing from Mark Head about the incredibly innovative things he's doing to hack procurement in the city of Philadelphia. So I don't want to steal any of that thunder, but suffice it to say that he and other leaders in this space are really figuring out what to do here in real time. Okay, so what would procurement reform look like, or what do we even mean by that? So I think of it really as kind of a spectrum of choices. And one end of the spectrum is thinking about just how to make the current process more transparent, so people just understand what's going on, and better transparency for the purchasers and better transparency for the vendors. And you'll hear Smart Procure talking about that in just a bit. There's also an issue or a possibility of improving access and actually getting new players into the system. And you'll hear from Screen Door about that in just a few minutes. And then on the other end of the spectrum is policy reform, actually making structural changes to how things work. And Kansas City is a great example of that, where the mayor recently signed a resolution that makes it easier for the city to contract with non-traditional firms, which gives the city better access to a greater diversity of products and services, and also spurs economic development and helps retain top talent in the city. So it's a win-win. Okay, so I want to end with a happy procurement story, because we don't hear many of those these days, but they do exist. And so this is the story of how the state of Massachusetts wanted to encourage innovation across the state. And so they did an innovation grant that was awarded to our friends, the heroes at New Urban Mechanics in the city of Boston, and you heard from Nigel Jacobs yesterday. And they worked together to contract with a for-profit civic startup called CfA, which, by the way, is really the pioneer in this space of for-profit companies trying to have a business model and have community engagement and impact. And Ben Berkowitz, the CEO, is in the audience as well. Okay, so the three of these parties worked together to create Commonwealth Connect, which is a 311 citizen reporting system that's been now deployed in 55 cities around the state. Okay, so why is this a happy story, and what went well here that we might be able to learn from? First of all was openness in government at all levels. So first of all, you had to have the innovation of having the New Urban Mechanics program in Boston to begin with. So that was kind of the trigger for the innovation. You had to have statewide support, and by support I mean not just the idea of let's try for something innovative in Massachusetts, but actually the money to make it happen, and that was very important. And finally, the cooperation and interest of all these different cities across the state who could have said, I don't want to participate in something where somebody else is choosing the vendor and I don't get a say, but instead cities decide to collaborate and take a little bit of a risk to try a solution in concert instead of going it alone. So openness was key. Okay, the second thing that made this a happy story was the innovation. And one of the innovations here is so beautifully simple, and yet it doesn't happen enough, which was when Nigel Jacobs and Chris Osgood put out the first RFP for this product. There were some bumps in the road because RFPs are difficult to understand and interpret. So they sat down, they literally took the piece of paper, they crossed out all the stuff that made no sense and no one could understand, and they rewrote the RFP into a document that anyone could understand, where the product that was being asked for was actually described in a way that different vendors, not just incumbents, but civic startups, could respond. And lo and behold, that enabled CfA and all the other participants in the process to respond. CfA was able to respond in 48 hours. The process was much more transparent. And from CfA's perspective, they got access to 55 customers in the time it normally would have taken to get one customer. So that's a real innovation. And as a result, in the course of 1 year, this idea went from a twinkle in the eye in the state of Massachusetts to the first deployments of the app. So procurement reform and change has really impacted the way government and citizens interact in Massachusetts. Through Commonwealth Connect, over 12,000 issues have now been reported, and 80% of those have been addressed and fixed. And what's also interesting is once you have a platform out there, of course, people use it in unexpected and interesting ways. And one of the ways I thought was most interesting was after the Boston Marathon bombing, residents in Boston spontaneously started posting advertisements for free housing to folks who were affected by the tragedy there. Okay, so a seemingly simple innovation, which is the state of Massachusetts working with partners to think about replacing a city-by-city procurement process by a one-stop shop state-level procurement process, enabled a quick, effective, and cost-conscious solution for the state with innovative technology. That was great for government, it was great for citizens, and it was great for a for-profit startup who could now get 55 new customers in the time it typically took to get one customer. So that's the happy procurement story. I really encourage us all to work together to think about how we can make more of these happy stories, how we can support individuals and organizations who are thinking creatively about procurement so that we can enable civic innovation in a for-profit form to complement the nonprofits and really enhance the relationship between citizens and government. Thanks.